How you going, everyone? Thanks for sticking around this afternoon. I've been doing a hell of a lot of validated learning, I call today, some of the presentation, particularly one that was just then, and it's been really good. But today I just want to talk to you guys about how we got our deployment soaring. And what I want to try and get across is the actual details on how we did it. So what we're going to go through a lot of things. Really what I want to talk about is a bit of a background about what I actually do and what we look after, but then a whole bunch of different areas that we attacked when it comes to deploying more frequently. So such things around our architecture, our people, our culture, our teams and our streams, a bit of monitoring and some of our learnings and outcomes. So what is SOAR? SOAR is our online booking engine that we have here at Flight Centre. So basically what it does is it provides the ability for customers to search for flights, both domestic and international, and also it allows us to book all different types of travel, including hotels, and packages will be coming up soon. We have another brand that sits on top of the platform called Universal Traveller. It was Student Flights, but now they just upgraded it. They said this name was a lot better, so we had to change that. SOAR, the booking engine, really it originated in Australia from it's been around for about 12 or 15 years. We've had this legacy platform, and it was primarily just focused on the Flight Centre brand. Recently, we've actually took the platform globally, so we've moved to New Zealand, and we've recently just deployed it in Canada, and each of those areas have their own product teams which leverage our platform. This is our system, or was our system. It's quite big. There's a lot of people involved in it, a lot of different types of roles. So we have our, obviously our customers, you can see there, who do search and book. But we also have finance people in there. We have online support, so when a customer rings up and says they've got a problem with a booking, they'll ring up and they'll talk to someone who will go and manage that booking in the system. So there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of live calls, a lot of changes that's going on, and any changes to the system can impact a whole bunch of people. This is the structure. It's nothing too crazy. It's basically how we are set up. I look after the technical arm, and then we've got our product managers to the left who utilise a lot of the specialists around pricing, UX, UI, and all that type of stuff. And we roll up to an Ecommerce general manager. The recent change that we've just done at Flight Centre is that I used to be in an IT department, this whole division, and to the CIO's credit, he's actually realised that we're better off sitting in the business and working with the business as opposed to being seen as an IT service provider, see it as part of the business. So that's been a really that's been a recent change, and it's actually working out quite well. So soaring deployment. So what I'm going to talk to you about quickly is the why, the what, the how, and what ifs we didn't do this. So what problems did we have? Just the usual ones that you've probably heard today. Definitely monolithic applications, databases, and build times. Our deployment cycle was anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks. That's usually quite generous. It could actually go up to 3 to 6 months back in the day, so it was quite interesting. Some other challenges, definitely this thing called PCI compliance, and then how the business treated us. So why did we want to do this? Multiple reasons. One of them is just to remain competitive. We've got a lot of, I guess, competitors out there who are continuously adding new features on the fly. So we wanted to be able to do that as well. Brightness of future, we call it BOF at Flight Centre. We want to make sure our people have the right skills and are consistently learning out there, otherwise they'll become stale and they'll hate working here. And on the flip side of that, we want to be attractive. So we don't want people to come in and say, hey, come and work on our app, and we deploy every 6 months and you use on-prem stuff and it's all shit. We read a book called Accelerate. A lot of people probably have read it, but we read about the high-performing teams and the 4 different types of metrics around how you measure high-performing teams. And one of them is around frequent deployments. So we decided to have a look at that. There was a lot of assumptions that come out of that we needed to validate. So one of them was around reducing the change fail rate, and we took that definition as every time you do a deployment, if you have to do a hot fix after it, that's a change fail because you've broken something. And then the other assumption is it will reduce our mean time to recovery. and because right now it's up to 8 hours on average for us to actually fix a problem because of the way the architecture works. Oh, and we wanted to remove some waste and costs. How are we going to do this? First thing was investment. Projects versus BA. I hate projects. I think they're crap. But they're quite good when it comes to leveraging, I guess, the investment in those projects. We use a lot of the project's investment costs to actually do a lot of this stuff we had to do to the architecture. So we did that. Whereas BAU, you don't get that opportunity because there is a certain amount of capacity that's allowed to do work. So going to the business and saying, hey, can we do this for our deployments? They'll probably say, no, we need these features out first. So we wanted to measure our outcomes and results. So how is this going to actually work? How are we going to know it's successful? What are we going to measure? The other things we looked at, or how we're going to do, is we're going to have to look at our architecture. We're going to have to look at what is involved in continuous delivery, and we have to educate some people, ask for forgiveness. So I did a fair bit of lying to get around some things, but it did work, and monitoring. And what if we didn't do this? That was a question we actually asked ourselves, and what impact would it have to our customers? Basically, a lot of the features we would deliver wouldn't actually go out as fast as they could. We'd have external competition breathing down our neck. We've got this funny thing in Flight Centre where we have like a real, I know we talk about tribes in the Spotify model, but we have these concepts called tribes in Flight Centre. And if you're not doing well, there can be an internal takeover, or someone else will just spin up a team and do it better because they have that investment. So that was another little impact thing that we had to worry about. Fixed mindset. So if we wanted to move on into our careers, we wanted to make sure we had the latest knowledge and methodologies and how we do things. So these are the things, what would happen if we didn't do this. So I want to talk to you about how we got started, particularly around our team's purposes and principles. So the first thing we actually did was actually sat down the team and said, why are we here? First of all, Flight Centre's got their purpose, which is we open up the world for those who want to see it. And then the team came up with their added value down the bottom through the rapid delivery of quality software our customers love. So when we come to talk about how we do things, we can use that purpose as to make sure that we've got focus. Behaviours. Some of them would have seen these behaviours in a book by Patrick. They're really good. So the first three are quite, the three that he talks about is humble, hungry, and people smart. I took humble as no smart twits or dickheads. But on the other side there, we have a bloody good time at Flight Centre. So while what we do, we take our work seriously. We definitely don't take ourselves seriously. That's the kind of motto and the kind of team player I want in our teams. These are our architecture principles. So these are the, I guess, guardrails we have in some aspects when we come to designing systems. And it's really important that I communicate this with the business, or not the business, our software architects, because I do enable them to go and do their job, like everyone says. I'll hire some smart people, go figure it out. But these are the guardrails I give them. So one of them is around, from moving forward, is around loosely coupled systems. So make sure any type of service that you have is independently deployable and independently testable. I don't care how big it is, they're the two main things it's got to be. Component driven is really just a fancy way of saying just share things where you can. Don't reinvent the wheel. If you've got one component doing one thing, work with UX to see how you can reuse that. And if we can do that, then that's great. Evolve and learn. I hate big upfront design, even though I get asked to design a system. What we usually do is we actually do thin slice architecture design, and then we evolve the architecture from there. And that's how we call it emerging design. And then we defer our changes at the last responsible moment. So what that means, if one service is about to get extremely complicated, then we'll change the software architecture, the design, to actually decouple that even further. Globally prepared is a bit of a political one that I had to put in there. We have crazy people out there who like to buy finance systems because they went on traveling and they'll say, hey, you need to stick your SOAR booking engine onto this. So we talk about building our application a way where we're going to integrate with like best practice systems or finance systems or GDSs and things like that. Our process, so how did we actually start thinking about where we're going to attack the deployments? So what we did is we had a planning day. with all the teams. And we come up with an initiative called Move Faster, and someone thought it was clever to call it Mufasa, so we call it the initiative Mufasa. And what we did is we looked at how we're actually going to measure this, or what are we actually trying to do here. And we did a pretty bad job of writing what they call an OKR, objective and key results, but we had to start somewhere. And it was basically, we wanted to increase deployments by 50% by X date. And these are the things that we're going to measure it on. We're going to increase this Prodigy, which is one of our front-end applications, by 50%, Monolith by 50%. And how we're going to measure it, we'll do an internal survey to see if they're satisfactory. And we're going to do this thing called reduce hot fixes by 20%. They're not hot fixes, we found out, they're hot features. There's things they want to get out really fast. So we had to have a look at that. And the team come up with the why for themselves, but also for the traveller. So we use this thing called a value stream map. So we actually mapped out the whole process of when there's an idea that comes in to all the way to the production. And then we put a time against how long each part took. And then we actually be able to collate it together to form this picture. So this is a very high level, I guess, value stream map of our release cycle. And this would probably be your happy flow. There's definitely a bad flow. But one of the big areas you can see where the idea takes up is where most of the time is spent is around the idea and business requirements. I couldn't attack that. Apparently they were doing really well in that area, so we just attacked what we could, which is around the cycle time. So you can see our standards would be 2 weeks, 2 sets of 2-week sprints with 2 weeks testing, 1 or 2 weeks to schedule a deployment, which was interesting, and then 6 hours for a release. So that was a great start, so we knew where to attack. Our architecture. So with that value stream map in mind, we looked at where we can attack. And the first one I want to talk to you about is this one, is the schedule and release. So why so much pain? Why does it take us 1 or 2 weeks to schedule a release? Why does it take us 6 hours to do deployment? And there's this thing called CAB, and you have to go get approval. And there's all these people who don't know what our booking engine does, but they're approving my sign-off for apps and all this sort of stuff. Change stress. Our deployments were complicated because we had large databases, large run sheets and all that sort of stuff. And rollbacks, there was never such a thing. We just had to roll forward and keep patching until we fixed it. Hot fixes, hot releases, we were sick of them. They were just crap, so we wanted to look at that. And then we asked who was actually monitoring our resources in regards to it, because we were throwing things over to operation. They weren't telling us anything. So we looked at that and we went, screw that. Let's move our DevOps team. Let's get a DevOps team into our team. Let them set up the infrastructure. Let's move to the cloud. So we did, and we set up a whole platform around that. Moving that out of the CAB process, moving that out of the operation team pretty much wiped this time off because we didn't have to talk to operations teams anymore. We didn't have to, we actually had control of what we were deploying. So a lot of that time is now gone. It's now within the team, within the deploy process. So one of the things we did was we started with a small service because we were doing a cloud migration, so we wanted to test a bunch of things. But we had some challenges. Some developers didn't like containers, especially Java guys. They wanted to build their own Kubernetes because they love the Java hammer. And so we had to get buy-in from the team. The other thing we needed to do was actually understand the CAB process because there is a bit of governance that we need to perceive that we look like we're doing. This is our monolith. It's pretty much a standard 3-layer architecture. You have your presentation layer, this big monolithic booking engine orchestration thing, and then we have our low backend integration with our GDS and low-cost carriers like your Jetstar, your Tiger, and all that type of stuff. So this is sort of trying to figure out how we can reduce a lot of the stress when it comes to releases. So the first thing we did is we sort of used a strangular pattern. I'm going to say sort of because it's not really. Usually a strangular pattern is you have like a proxy between you and the presentation layer and it goes to the new system that way, if that's the way you read it. We just pulled a small service out. In this case, it was a fair rounding service. And all the service did was when a customer did a search, it would push all the search results to it. it would then apply a fair rounding margin, whether it's up or down, and then push the results back. Usually we would build that into the monolith, but this time we just had a small service out to the side. It sat in the cloud, it talked to on-prem, and we learned a hell of a lot about cloud containerizations, deployments, and all that. And that's how we got started. Then projects started to come flying through. So instead of building, on our platform we have flights, you can book flights in hotels. So they wanted to dedicate some resources into our hotel booking engine, which sits on the SOAR platform. So what we did was we pulled out all the hotel search and book, or not the book part, we left the book part there, but mainly our search content and added some new services. We still use the monolith for the pay because we didn't want to split that out. That was actually quite complicated. It was still in PCI compliance, but that was all in the cloud as well. And then we split some more stuff out. So search, that's probably where most of our volume comes at the moment. So when there's a sale on or something, most of our volume or transactions or throughput will come through from our search. And so what we did, instead of going through the on-prem monolith to do the search to the GDS, we actually split that out again and just did a search component. This actually proved really quite valuable recently when we've integrated with an aggregator called Skyscanner, which doubles our throughput, and we were able to scale our pods quite well. So if I go back, you can start to see with that architecture is starting to help design our teams and team and structure. So our teams and structure, we call them streams and teams. Originally it was just one team, and then as we changed the architecture, we sort of started to split out our teams to align to that architecture. It was all still supported by support. We call support, how would I explain it? It's when an airline or a GDS is going to do an API change, we need to know about it. So we have to have a bunch of support people to go and either put maintenance pages up or we need to work around it. So there's a team that does that. I have architecture, I call them software architects instead of solution architects, just to get around a bit more politics. But that's definitely one thing that we have in our team. They're more like tech leads. And then DevOps, that's all in our world. So as we started to change our architecture, our teams and streams started to change, and it made sense to do it at that time. Our pipelines are definitely not easy. Some of our challenges around our pipelines is build times. There was one application that took 6 hours to build, and I was like, why is it taking 6 hours? And what we found was they were running these tests and they were hitting an endpoint and they were just sitting there and they were doing nothing. But no one actually said why or went and had a look. And once we investigated, I think we dropped it down to like 20 minutes. We started deploying large code bases, so that even got trickier with our pipelines. Our skills, we didn't have continuous delivery skills within our team, so we had to get that brought in. Environments for third-party services is a nightmare because you can't test against their production service, so they give you a test server, and that test server does not mimic their production environment. So there's a lot of challenges there. So what we did with our deployment pipeline is we took a step back and we said, what do we want it to be? So we took when an idea comes into a test production and said, this is our ideal state. This is how we want things to go. And whether we want it a hot fix or a big release, we wanted to look at the same process, not skipping things. So we took this map here and we actually built that map into our pipelines into Jenkins, and that's the way we got started in improving our pipelines. So release trains, I stole this from Spotify. Well, they probably stole it from someone else, so we're always stealing. But this helped us start to set a bit of a cadence around how we do and when we do deployments. And particularly around educating ourselves around feature toggles, quite powerful. So what we do now is a developer will tag their Jira or their pull request with a next SOAR release tag. And then depending on what app, depending on what day, we'll actually schedule a release time for that app. And that tag will go out to production, and if it's wrapped in a feature toggle, it'll be turned off and on. And that way we can always keep deploying to production. And then when we want to actually turn a whole feature on, we just turn the toggle on. And it just reduces a whole bunch of like big change release stress. The other thing we did was we used the same pattern for on-demand deployments. We just added a fixed version to that label. So just to continue on, the things that we did change is within our pipeline as well, is we stopped running silly regression tests that no one actually looked at the feedback after those regression tests. Someone just said approved, but we were waiting for it. So it was a whole lot of just like learning about what the team does and why they're doing things. We changed from deploying tags to deploying containers, which is quite cool, and which means we can push containers all the way up through the stack. We changed our delivery methodology with feature toggles, which I just talked about, and the testing stuff with a third party, we had to stub those services out and just guess whether it's going to work or not. Quality and testing. This has been one of the hardest things to get going, but there's two main things I want to talk to you about here. First is, why was there 2 weeks of testing? What were we doing? What test coverage was there? Business acceptance testing, users acceptance testing, scheduling, why are we doing that? And what is our developers coverage? So the easiest win we've had for reducing time was when I asked, why is there 2 weeks of testing? And the testers just went, it's always been like that. So I said, okay, so what do you do in that 2 weeks of testing? And they just said, well, we run regression tests and then we schedule the business to come and do acceptance testing. I'm like, how long is the regression test going to run? He goes, oh, a day. All right, well, how hard is it to schedule these guys to do some testing? Well, we only need them for 2 hours. So I'm like, well, can we not do 2 weeks of testing? And it's like, so we just moved it into like 3 days worth of testing. Then what we did is we shifted some of the testing to the left. This was actually quite hard to do, particularly to get buy-in from the developers. And what we've actually done is we want the developers to actually write more of the tests. We don't want the QAs to write the tests for the developers. We actually want unit tests done by developers. We want functional and integration tests done by developers. And we want the QAs to do more of the exploratory testing. They want them to do more of the device testing, all that type of stuff that developers don't actually get time for, it's working quite well now. So when we scale our development teams, we don't necessarily have to scale our QA teams because most of the testing now is done by the developers. Another really important thing that we've changed is identify who does the testing. And this is a bit of a mindset change that we do now. So when we workshop our stories, we have a QA and we have a developer, and they actually sit there and they'll write into Jira or whatever on a board the actual tests that they think they need to prove the acceptance criteria. And then they'll actually have a conversation. So if you just cover that in your functional test, then I don't have to write any regression tests around it because it's already covered. And that way we don't have to throw it over the wall. Compliance, what a nightmare. So two main things here I want to talk about that's really made our life better is our migration to AWS EKS, which because it's PCI compliant, so it does a whole bunch of things out of the box. So when Mr. Compliance comes along and does an audit, then we say it's all our audit patching's done, all the libraries are up to date because it's all in there, which is great. The second thing is moving all our security scanning into the deployment pipeline. So every piece of code is scanned, every piece of code has documentation that's linked to a threat model, it's linked to a Jira, that's linked to the business requirements, so there's that traceability for when we get audited. That's been amazing. Still having troubles though with when we do get audited, they ask for a huge amount of documentation, and it's usually just screenshots of, your pull request, are you following OWASP and all that type of stuff. So we're going to look at automating those screenshots. I'm getting told to hurry up. Learning and outcomes, so we're getting to the end. It's hard to do if you don't have the right people. I've got good people. They made this possible. It was really, really good. Focus on what you can control. So like I talked about, that whole business requirements take 6 months. I couldn't deal with that to start with, so we could just focus on our deployment pipeline. We went too fast for the business, so Mr. Origin guy actually hit the nail on the head. They just said, stop going to production because we haven't gone marketing. I had to explain to them about feature toggles. We just turned things off. and we toggle them on when they're ready. So that was interesting. CI tools weren't scaling. We're dealing with that problem right now. Micro UIs for decoupling presentation releases. So we actually have React components that we can deploy individually outside the presentation or inside the presentation layer, so we don't have to do big presentation deployments now. That's proving quite well. We're on our serverless and event-driven architecture, and the main outcome is with the changes, we've actually reduced our mean time to recovery. There is an issue with this slide, and it's my bad. I put the deploy and testing on the wrong way around, but anyway, these are the outcomes of what we're doing now for these changes. So release train once a week, multiple apps. That's pretty much it. And we can do on-demand deployments at the moment. It's not perfect, but we're getting there. Some screenshots. So this is a dashboard of all our deployments over the last 360 days and who's been doing them and who's been doing most. So there's a bit of a competition going on right now around who's doing the most deployments, and something that we keep an eye on, because if I notice there's an app that's doing more deployments, I want to know why. Are they fixing things? What are they doing? So it's quite handy. So this is now at my stack, or the source stack. So there's a couple of main things. From there we start to split out the main monolith, which is in the middle. But now we've got services everywhere, and monitoring is crucial, more crucial than ever. So New Relic's helping us out with that. And then it actually gets bigger, with more services, so more microservices, and actually gets bigger. That's not actually all the apps I've found out, but it's that big it can't even put labels on it. Anyway, that is all I have. Any questions, come see me. Thank you, guys.